30. But for almost 20 years of his life, there is a strange silence. This time is often called the lost years. What did Jesus do during this time? Where did he go? Who had an effect on him? And maybe the most interesting thing is what secrets might be hidden in the texts that aren't in the Western Bible. Anyone who wants to learn more about Jesus' life and the deeper spiritual and historical truths that may have been quietly kept in forgotten scriptures will find these questions interesting. This gap has sparked speculation and wonder for generations. Some historians think he lived a simple, secret life in Nazareth, learning a trade and waiting for the right time to start his ministry. Others say that he traveled, went to faraway places, and looked for knowledge that would help him carry out the amazing mission he was meant to do. The lack of detailed records in the canonical texts creates a deep mystery, a story that makes us think about what could have happened. In today's world, the interest in ancient wisdom, lost histories, and hidden knowledge is closely related to this question. People today look for secrets in old manuscripts or hidden archives all over the world. The missing years of Jesus make us wonder what he learned, how his experiences shaped his view of people, and what lessons were kept that we don't know about. This is where the Ethiopian Bible comes in. It gives us a look at a tradition that has kept details that are missing from the Western canon. Unlike the familiar 66 or 73 books of the Protestant or Catholic Bibles, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains a Bible containing 88 books, written in the ancient Gizi language, some of which include texts considered lost or excluded elsewhere. Some of these are stories and teachings that give hints about the hidden years of Jesus, describing journeys, encounters, and mystical experiences that go against what most people think. These texts say that Jesus spent his early adulthood learning, exploring his spirituality, and getting ready for what was to come. He may have even traveled to places like Egypt and Ethiopia. Even though mainstream scholars and churches may not pay much attention to these writings, they give us a fascinating look at how ancient communities thought about Jesus as a child and how he became wise. The Ethiopian scriptures imply that during these years, Jesus did not stay in his hometown or only with people he knew. Instead, he may have learned from educated people, spiritual leaders, and maybe even early mystical traditions. These lessons may have helped him with his ministry and teachings later on. The texts suggest a life of preparation, a journey of discovery and reflection, as he met people, ideas, and problems that helped him understand faith, human nature, and God's purpose. This view, which is up for debate, lets us picture Jesus not just as a boy growing up in relative obscurity, but as a seeker of knowledge who quietly gathered the experiences that would shape his later life. This mystery has a special meaning for people today. In a time when people want to learn about secret histories, hidden truths, and knowledge that goes against the mainstream, the story of the missing years is both interesting and alive. It makes us think about what has been passed down, what has been kept, and what might still be hidden in history. It is a call to be curious, to get involved, and to be amazed, not just about a person who lived more than 2,000 years ago, but also about the nature of wisdom, learning, and spiritual growth over time. As we start this journey into the secret years of Jesus, it's important to remember that this is more than just a story about history. It is a story that connects the past and the present and makes us think about questions that are still important. How can we find the truth when the records we have are not complete? What do we do with teachings that have been kept alive in one tradition but ignored in another? And how can old books, like the Ethiopian Bible, give us new ideas that make us think differently about one of history's most important people? These questions are more than just academic. They are the start of a story that is both human and transcendent, mixing history, spirituality, and imagination in ways that move the mind and the heart. Before we look at what these Ethiopian texts say, we want to take a moment to thank you, our viewers. You are an important part of this journey. We can only bring you these deep and interesting stories because of your interest, involvement, and support. We hope you can help us get to 10,000 subscribers so we can keep finding hidden knowledge and sharing it in ways that make people think and wonder. If you like these explorations, please consider sending us a super thanks to help us financially so we can go even deeper into these ancient teachings and share more of this knowledge. We also want to know your name and where you are watching from. Please leave your name and city in the comments. This helps us connect with our audience and see how far this journey has spread around the world. If you want to learn more about these teachings, don't forget that the link in the description will take you to the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English. If you share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel, we can keep exploring together and build a community of people who want to learn more about the mysteries found in ancient texts. As we enter the story of Jesus' lost years, get ready to follow a path that mixes history, faith, and imagination. This journey won't just tell stories you already know. It will show you a side of Jesus' life that hasn't been seen in hundreds of years, giving you new ideas and insights that will make you think, inspire, and challenge you. The years that are missing aren't just a blank spot in history. They are a chance to think about what could have happened, picture the events that shaped him, and connect with a tradition that keeps stories that the rest of the world has forgotten or missed. The Ethiopian Bible will help us understand the shape of a young man's life, the decisions he made, and the wisdom he may have gained before he became a minister, which changed history forever. The New Testament only gives us brief glimpses of Jesus' early years. The Gospels tell the story of how he was born in Bethlehem, how the Magi came to see him, how he fled to Egypt to escape Herod's order, and how he briefly returned to Nazareth. A few chapters talk about his family life, including his parents Mary and Joseph. They also tell the story of when he was 12 and was found at the temple in Jerusalem talking to the elders and surprising them with how much he knew. But other than these few events, the text is quiet. There is very little record of what he did, learned, or grew for almost 20 years. There is almost no record of this long time, which lasted from the end of his childhood to the start of his public ministry at age 30. This has left a gap that has puzzled both scholars and believers. Different people have come up with different ideas about this silence. Some people think that Jesus lived a simple, unremarkable life in Nazareth, where he learned to be a carpenter from Joseph and quietly got ready for the ministry that would define the rest of his life. Some people say that this time of normalcy was important for him to understand the rhythms of work, family, and community, which would later shape his teachings on compassion, justice, and faith. However, despite these elucidations, the inquiries persist. Why is there an absence of a more comprehensive account of his thoughts, journeys, or personal development during this period? Why do the canonical Gospels, which otherwise give very detailed accounts of his birth and ministry, not look at such a large part of his life? For a long time, scholars have argued about why this was left out. Some people say that the Gospel writers' main focus was on Jesus' public ministry, miracles, death, and resurrection, and that the early years were less important to the message they wanted to send. Some people think that there may have been other records that were lost, hidden, or left out of the texts that became part of the canon on purpose. Because there aren't many details, people can guess what happened, and historians have found the questions about these years to be more interesting as they've looked into the cultural and historical context of first-century Judea. In this silence, every little thing matters. For instance, there has been a lot of research on what happened in the temple. At the age of 12, Jesus is said to have understood Scripture in a way that surprised religious leaders, which suggests that he was already aware of his divine purpose. But after that, he went back to Nazareth with his parents and was obedient to them. This simple statement makes the ordinary flow of life stand out and leaves everything else to the imagination. What did he do as a teenager? Did he go on trips, learn from other teachers, or stay alone? The New Testament does not provide answers, resulting in the period referred to as the silent years. There are many different ideas about these years. Some scholars think that Jesus may have traveled outside of Galilee, maybe to Egypt, where there were Jewish communities and he could have studied Scripture more deeply. Others think he might have spent time in the desert, thinking about and getting ready spiritually for the ministry that was to come. There is, however, no clear textual evidence for these ideas in the canonical Gospels. The silence itself has become a strong lens through which people look at what could have been, leading to centuries of discussion, artistic interpretation, and religious thought. This gap has sparked both scholarly research and the imaginations of those who want to know more about Jesus' life. Writers, historians, and theologians have conjectured regarding the experiences that may have informed his worldview, the teachings he potentially derived from his family and community, and the impact of his interactions with common individuals on his doctrines. The New Testament is mostly quiet, but the lack of information has led to a lot of questions about the human side of Jesus' life that go beyond the miracles and sermons in the Gospels. The silence also highlights the difference between what is kept and what is lost in old texts. The Gospels give us a lot of information about some events, but only a little about others. This makes us wonder what knowledge, experiences, and insights were never written down. Researchers are still looking into the historical and cultural context of the time to come up with possible scenarios. They look at things like the Jewish educational system, social structures, and the kinds of jobs a young man in Nazareth might have had. Every piece of information, even if it's not much, is important because it helps us picture the young Jesus and the events that shaped him before he started his public ministry. Some people have looked into sources outside of the Western Bible to learn more about these years, such as ancient texts and traditions that didn't make it into the canonical scriptures. These sources frequently indicate that Jesus' early adulthood was anything but conventional, alluding to travels, encounters, and teachings that broadened his comprehension of humanity and the divine. The New Testament doesn't say much, but it does make us curious, which leads us to these other stories. They make us think about a life of quiet preparation, hidden wisdom, and experiences that, even though they weren't written down, may have had a big impact on the man who would later change history. There is no other sacred text like the Ethiopian Bible in the world. The 66 books of the Protestant Bible and the 73 books of the Catholic canon are the basis for most Christian traditions. However, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has a collection that goes far beyond these well-known limits. Its full set of scriptures has 88 books, most of which are written in the ancient Gizi language, which is older than many of the texts that Westerners are used to. Gizi is an ancient language that not only tells stories of faith but also connects to centuries of religious culture, scholarship, and oral tradition in Ethiopia. Monasteries and churches took great care to keep these texts safe. They were copied over and over again, with great care given to every detail. They were often accompanied by commentaries, illustrations, and ritual notes that help the faithful understand and interpret them. The Ethiopian Bible is special not only because of its size, but also because of what it says. Many of the books in this canon are not in Western Bibles. Many of them have stories, lessons, and histories that give a different view of biblical events. Some of these are books like 1 Enoch, Jubilees, and other apocryphal writings that talk about things and times that aren't talked about very often. The Book of Enoch, for instance, goes into more detail about the Watchers, the fallen angels, and how humans interacted with divine beings in the past. These are stories that are only hinted at in the canonical scriptures. Other texts have longer family trees, historical accounts, and moral lessons that add to or go against the stories in the Western tradition. For hundreds of years, Ethiopian monks kept these works safe and copied them carefully, valuing both their spiritual meaning and their historical value. The Ethiopian Bible came about because of the area's special role in the early spread of Christianity. During the reign of King Ezana in the 4th century, Ethiopia officially adopted Christianity. This made it one of the first countries to do so. The Church built up a long history of studying theology by keeping texts that were popular in the wider Christian world but were later left out of the Western canon for a variety of reasons. This preservation was not by chance. It was a deliberate effort to protect knowledge, teachings, and interpretations that were important to Ethiopian Christians. In many cases, these texts only exist in Guizi manuscripts that are kept safe in monasteries that served as places of learning, devotion, and scriptural study. Scholars have gathered historical and textual evidence over the years that backs up the Ethiopian Bible's reliability. The careful passing down of these texts is shown by manuscripts from the 14th and 15th centuries, and in some cases even earlier. Researchers looking at these documents have noticed that the content is the same in all of them, which suggests that someone made a conscious effort to keep it accurate. The Ethiopian Church has large libraries, many of which are hidden in mountain monasteries, where you can compare different versions of important texts. In addition to being consistent with each other, many of these writings also match up with references in early Jewish and Christian apocryphal works, which adds to their historical validity. These connections support the idea that the Ethiopian Bible is not a fringe tradition but a serious, historically based body of scripture that has been kept alive for hundreds of years in a culture that is very proud of its spiritual heritage. One of the most interesting things about the Ethiopian canon is that it has books that shed light on parts of biblical history that Western accounts don't cover very well. For instance, the Ethiopian texts tell stories about patriarchs, prophets, and angels that add to stories we already know in ways that make us rethink what we think we know. Some of these writings talk about things that scholars think happened during the silent years of Jesus. They give us a look into experiences, travels, and spiritual encounters that aren't in the New Testament. These texts frequently encompass teachings on morality, divine intent, and human accountability, integrating historical narrative with theological contemplation in a manner distinctive to the Ethiopian tradition. These texts are also interesting because of their style and approach. They are written in Guizi, which gives them a rhythm, structure, and literary quality that is different from Greek or Latin scriptures. Many parts of the book have poetic passages, vivid storytelling, and rich symbolism, which make them both spiritually meaningful and historically informative. Scholars and theologians have been able to study these manuscripts in depth because they were carefully preserved. They have traced their lineage, compared versions, and learned how early Christians in Ethiopia understood scripture and events in the lives of important biblical figures. The Ethiopian Bible is an important book for people who want to learn more about the mysteries of Jesus' life. Western texts don't have any information about his early years, travels, or teachings that are in this one. These books frequently depict encounters with sages, spiritual mentors, and communities beyond Judea, indicating a more expansive and intricate experience than is typically recognized. The New Testament doesn't say much about these years, but the Ethiopian canon has a story that talks about preparing, learning, and getting involved in the world. This was a time in the man's life that shaped him into the person who would later become central to the Christian faith. The fact that these texts are still around shows how strong Ethiopian Christianity is. The church went through political changes, invasions, and pressure from other Christian groups over the years, but it kept its own canon. Monks and scholars worked hard to copy manuscripts by hand so that future generations would be able to read them. Their work has made it possible for modern readers to read texts that might have been lost, keeping voices and stories alive that help us learn more about biblical history and spirituality. Ultimately, the Ethiopian Bible is more than just a collection of texts. It is a window into a living tradition that has stayed the same since the early Christian communities and gives us new information that is often missing from mainstream stories. The 88 books, written in Guizi and kept alive for hundreds of years, make us think about the bigger picture of biblical history and the wealth of teachings that have survived outside of the Western canon. If you want to know more about Jesus' life, especially the mysterious years that aren't written down in the New Testament, the Ethiopian Bible can help you get a deeper, more nuanced understanding. This tradition combines history, spirituality, and human experience in ways that still make people curious and think today. The Ethiopian texts depict Jesus' formative years with a striking humanity, enabling us to perceive him not merely as the Son of God but also as a child navigating the commonplace realms of family, community, and education. Mary and Joseph, who loved him and gave him structure, were there for him from the moment he took his first steps. Mary, who was always watching out for her son, often looked at him with a mix of awe and quiet worry, sensing that he had a purpose that went beyond the normal life of a boy in Nazareth. Joseph, who was patient and steady, taught him how to be a craftsman, how to work with wood, and how to live a life based on hard work and responsibility. During these early years, Jesus went through all the normal stages of childhood, including curiosity, frustration, happiness, and the occasional rebellious behavior that all kids go through. The Ethiopian texts indicate that even as a child, Jesus exhibited distinctive traits. There were times when it seemed like he knew more than his age. He would often spend a lot of time looking at nature, thinking about the stars' patterns, or thinking about the cycles of life around him. While other kids played or fought over little things, he would sit quietly and ask questions that surprised both adults and older people. These times weren't just intellectual curiosity, they were early signs of a mind that was very aware of both people and God. His parents, though sometimes confused, saw these signs as unusual. They also kept him out of the spotlight so he could grow, learn, and develop without too much pressure or exposure. Nazareth was a place where Jesus could grow and learn, but it was also hard. The town was small and surrounded by hills and farmland. Every day, you could hear villagers working, animals braying, and the occasional argument that happens in any close-knit community. He played with other kids and learned how to be friends, fight, and make up, but he always did it with a quiet depth that set him apart from other kids. When people didn't agree, he often stepped in to help them work things out, showing wisdom and fairness that was beyond his years. Even though these experiences may seem normal, they helped shape a person who could be empathetic, discerning, and patient, traits that would define his later ministry. The Ethiopian texts also tell of early signs from God that filled Jesus' childhood with quiet awe. One story tells how he healed a hurt bird when he was a boy, which got the attention of his family and neighbors. These kinds of things never happened on purpose. They happened naturally as part of a life where God's presence and human experience were intertwined. People who saw these moments were both amazed and worried because they knew that this child was different and had a destiny that was both a blessing and a heavy burden. The mix of the miraculous and the everyday helped Jesus learn humility, patience, and how to quietly accept his special place in the world. His teenage years are also shown with care and detail. The Ethiopian texts show a young man dealing with his feelings, doubts, and the pressure of expectations. He sometimes wondered about the world around him, thinking about unfairness, pain, and how short life is. He struggled with knowing what his divine purpose was while still wanting to enjoy the simple things in life that young people do, like making friends, playing, and learning. These struggles were not flaws. Instead, they show a very human side of Jesus that anyone who has ever felt unsure, doubted themselves, or felt the weight of responsibility before becoming an adult can relate to. Family life was very important in making him who he was. The texts talk about long nights spent with Mary, who told stories about faith, history, and moral lessons. Joseph taught him useful skills and how to be patient and disciplined. Siblings and cousins were there for each other, sometimes fought, and always taught each other how to be kind and understanding. Through these interactions, Jesus experienced the full range of human relationships, the joys of love, the sting of disagreement, the relief of reconciliation, and the warmth of community. Every conversation and every moment of everyday life helped him understand people better and get ready for a ministry that would require a lot of compassion and insight. Jesus had a lot of feelings, even when he was alone. The Ethiopian texts show him quietly thinking under olive trees, feeling both amazed by the world and more aware of the duty he would eventually have to take on. He felt scared, hopeful, frustrated, and happy, all the feelings that come with growing up in a world that was both normal and strange. These passages help readers picture him as a real child and teenager, not just a character in a religious story. These stories give us a sense of how deeply he cared about others, how much he thought about things, and how the moral and spiritual wisdom that would later shape his life began to form in him. The small community where he grew up helped shape who he is. Teachers, elders, and neighbors noticed his insights and sometimes asked him for advice or talked to him because he seemed to know a lot about both the Bible and human nature. But unlike most famous or infamous people, these interactions stayed private and quiet, adding depth to his experience without overwhelming him. The mix of normal life and extraordinary insight made a unique setting where Jesus could learn to be patient, humble, and wise in everyday situations. The Ethiopian texts make Jesus more human in ways that Western scriptures don't often do. They remind us that even someone who is going to be great starts out as a child, learning through play, family time, study, and thinking. They give a creative but very real picture of how he might have felt joy, doubt, responsibility, and wonder, an experience shaped by both the divine and the everyday. This makes him more relatable to us because we can see that he was a boy learning, watching, asking questions, and growing in the world he would eventually change before he did miracles and gave sermons. Ethiopian sources say that Jesus's silent years were not normal at all. They were a time of exploration, learning, and spiritual growth, and he spent a lot of time outside of Nazareth's familiar hills. These texts say that Jesus went south to Africa when he was young and visited places like Egypt and the ancient kingdom of Kush, which were known for their deep spiritual traditions, wisdom, and mystery. The journey was not just a physical one. It was a spiritual and mental pilgrimage guided by a higher purpose and a desire to learn more about the deeper truths of creation. He walked through busy villages, along the banks of the Nile, and across huge deserts that seemed to go on forever under the hot sun. Each step taught him something useful and something mysterious. People say that Jesus went to Egypt to learn from wise men and scholars who kept the old teachings of their civilization alive. He walked among huge temples with walls covered in hieroglyphs and symbols that told stories of gods, kings, and the order of the universe. He listened carefully as the priests chanted in time with the stone walls. He learned about astronomy, math, medicine, and philosophy. These scholars were not only teachers of common sense, but they also kept spiritual knowledge safe. With their help, Jesus studied and meditated, learning how to bring together what he learned with what he thought about, which helped him find a balance between his mind and spirit that would later be the basis for his teachings. The Ethiopian texts talk about mystical experiences that happened during these trips, times when the divine seemed to touch the natural world in both subtle and dramatic ways. One part talks about how Jesus had visions of heavenly beings and cosmic patterns while he was meditating alone on the banks of the Nile. These visions showed him a reality that was beyond what most people could see. He would often get up before dawn and walk along the river as the mist rose over the water. He could feel the pulse of creation and the presence of forces that were not visible but were very real. The desert's harsh sun and endless sands became a place for him to think, where he could face his inner questions, fight with doubt, and learn to be patient and strong. These experiences were important in developing a spiritual awareness that combined compassion with clarity and insight with humility. When Jesus traveled to Kush, he found a culture that was full of both rituals and everyday life. He watched the Nile's floods, which made the land fertile and set the schedule for planting and harvesting. He met both kings and common people and learned from their stories, struggles, and wisdom. There were lots of colors, smells, and sounds in the markets. The smell of spices, the bright fabrics of merchants, and the lively bargaining of traders. Villagers told stories about their ancestors, cosmic myths, and moral lessons. These stories taught Jesus about justice, leadership, and how human life and divine order are connected. In Kush, education was not limited to classrooms or scrolls. It was ingrained in the land, the rituals, and the collective memory of the populace. The Ethiopian writings also say that Jesus learned useful skills while he was on these trips. He learned about herbal medicine, watched artisans at work, and practiced healing and body care techniques in addition to spiritual instruction. He spent hours in libraries full of papyrus and stone inscriptions, figuring out what the symbols meant and thinking about what they really meant. Every encounter, from talking to a wise person to sitting quietly in the desert, was important and helped him get ready for the ministry he would eventually do. The lessons he learned were complete, combining mental, spiritual, and physical understanding. They prepared him to meet the needs of people and the mysteries of the divine. The places he saw left a lasting impression on him. The pyramids in Egypt cast long shadows over the desert sands. They have seen centuries of history and devotion. The Nile flowed in a steady rhythm, providing food and stories of the past for many generations. The red clay of the villages, the thick palm groves along the riverbanks, and the wide savannas that stretched out to the horizon all made people feel like they were part of both the natural and human worlds in Kush. The Ethiopian texts are full of vivid pictures of these places, showing how they changed not only Jesus' experiences but also how he saw the world as a tapestry of visible and invisible forces that were all connected. This journey was mostly about talking to mystics and teachers. These people often tested Jesus with moral dilemmas, riddles, and paradoxes that made him think deeply and learn how to tell right from wrong. Some people talked to him for a long time about life, death, and the divine order. Others led him through rituals that were meant to help him become more aware of his inner self and connect with spiritual truths. The combination of intellectual engagement and mystical practice allowed him to integrate knowledge and experience, forming a foundation that would later inform his teachings on ethics, faith, and human purpose. The Ethiopian texts also emphasize the emotional and personal growth that occurred during this period. Jesus experienced wonder, frustration, awe, and humility as he navigated unfamiliar lands and customs. He learned to observe without judgment, to listen deeply, and to cultivate patience with both himself and others. The journey into Africa, while external in geography, was profoundly internal as well, a path of self-discovery, discipline, and preparation for the public life that lay ahead. Every river crossed, every desert traversed, and every dialogue with a teacher or villager contributed to the shaping of a young man ready to embrace his destiny. Through these travels, Jesus developed a perspective that was both local and universal. He understood the realities of human struggle, the importance of compassion, and the need for wisdom grounded in experience. He saw how cultures, rituals, and daily life reflected deeper spiritual truths and how knowledge could be integrated with action. The Ethiopian texts show him walking through these lands with curiosity and respect, learning not just facts and practices but also the rhythms of life and how to see divine purpose in both everyday and extraordinary situations. The texts say that Jesus was different when he came back from Egypt and Kush. He had a deep spiritual understanding, compassion for human suffering, knowledge of cultural diversity, and practical skills for teaching and healing. These years, which Western accounts mostly leave out, were full of learning, thinking, and getting ready. They show a young man who was shaped by places, people, and events that were much bigger than the small town of Nazareth. These experiences gave his later ministry a depth of wisdom and compassion that would have a lasting impact on the world. The Ethiopian texts indicate that Jesus' absence from Nazareth involved extensive travel and observation, as well as significant instruction in esoteric and concealed knowledge. People said he learned from wise people and teachers who had ancient knowledge that had been passed down through the generations. These people said they could talk to angels and see how the universe worked in ways that normal people couldn't. These lessons were much more than just schoolwork. They taught about the nature of life, the invisible forces that shape human destiny, and the delicate balance between what God wants and what people do. Every time he met with a teacher, it was both a test and a wake-up call, pushing him to improve both his mind and his spiritual awareness. One of the most interesting things about these teachings was how much they focused on angelic knowledge. Jesus was taught about the hierarchy of heavenly beings, what they do, and how they interact with people. The Ethiopian texts say that he would think about their patterns, listen to stories about how they had helped people in the past, and even do things that made him feel their presence. He didn't learn this for show. He learned it to help him in his later ministry, to tell the difference between truth and lies, and to understand the moral and cosmic order that holds the world together. The texts suggest that Western church authorities may have disregarded these teachings due to their challenge to traditional scriptural interpretations and the introduction of concepts deemed too obscure or threatening to established doctrine. Another important part of the secret knowledge Jesus learned was how to heal. The Ethiopian texts tell stories of how he learned advanced medical and spiritual healing techniques from African sages. He learned about herbs, natural cures, and ways to ease physical pain, all while praying and aligning himself with God. These practices were connected to a deeper understanding of the soul, emotions, and energy of people, which made for a complete way to restore health. In these stories, Jesus is shown to be patient, observant, and very caring. He often practiced for hours with help from his teachers, learning not only the techniques themselves but also the morals and reasons behind them. Ethiopian stories, on the other hand, suggest a private, disciplined, and deeply thought-out way of healing, while Western stories focus on miracles done in public. Prophecy was another important part of the secret teachings. Jesus is shown as studying the cycles of history, how people act, and how celestial bodies move so that he can predict events and understand the bigger picture of divine purpose. He learned how to read signs, understand dreams, and see spiritual currents that might affect the future. Some authorities in Ethiopia thought these lessons were dangerous because they showed people how to use power and see into the future, which was not allowed for public instruction. But for Jesus, prophecy and compassion were always linked. The goal was always to guide, protect, and shed light on things, not to rule or control them. These mystical teachings often used stories and symbols to teach. To get across complicated ideas, teachers used parables, allegories, and cryptic stories. One story tells of a vision in which Jesus saw the movement of heavenly light reflected on the waters of a hidden oasis. He saw this as a message about how divine guidance and human choice work together. Another story tells of a lesson in which he learned to tell the difference between truth and illusion by watching how animals in the desert act and thinking about how their patterns can be used as examples for how people make moral decisions. These kinds of stories not only shared information, but they also taught the mind to see layers of meaning, which helped develop intuition, insight, and moral judgment. The Ethiopian texts also stress the moral aspects of this knowledge. Every lesson came with a duty. Knowing the unseen world wasn't just about knowing things. It was also about doing something about it with compassion, fairness, and moral integrity. Jesus' teachers told him that wisdom could only be useful if it helped people and was in line with God's plan. This moral framework supported the mystical teachings, making sure that the young man who learned them would later use them in a ministry that focused on empathy, healing, and life-changing advice. Scholars of the Ethiopian canon suggest that the West left out these teachings for both doctrinal and political reasons. Understanding angels, prophecy, and mystical wisdom questioned hierarchical systems and offered a perspective on human potential that was not exclusively dependent on authorized clerical interpretation. Moreover, these texts included aspects that might be regarded as esoteric or challenging to regulate, prompting apprehensions regarding heresy or deviation from established scripture. The Ethiopian Church, on the other hand, kept these teachings alive because they understood their spiritual meaning and protected the manuscripts that passed them down through the years. This preservation allowed generations to access a more comprehensive understanding of Jesus' education and preparation, uncovering aspects of his life deliberately omitted from Western narratives. Jesus' interactions with his teachers were not merely intellectual exercises, but profoundly personal experiences. The Ethiopian texts tell of nights spent quietly thinking under the stars, hours spent watching rituals and meditations meant to help him connect with spiritual forces, and conversations that made him think about what justice, humility, and discernment really mean. These events changed not only what he knew but also who he was. He learned to be patient, strong, and responsible for what he learned. Every lesson in prophecy, healing, or angelic hierarchy was connected to moral and emotional growth. This laid the groundwork for him to later handle the challenges of ministry with authority and compassion. The texts also highlight a mystical dimension that was central to these teachings. Jesus is said to have done things to improve his perception, feel the presence of divine beings, and understand the subtle forces that shape the world. These activities included meditation, observing rituals, and symbolic exercises meant to help people understand things better. They were often held in natural places like by rivers, under old trees, or in quiet caves, which made it easier to think and connect with God. These experiences gave him a deep understanding of both the seen and the unseen. This understanding would later help him teach, heal, and guide others with kindness and clarity. The Ethiopian texts essentially depict Jesus' concealed teachings as a pivotal phase in his development. These lessons in angelic knowledge, healing, prophecy, and secret wisdom were not just interesting or made-up stories. They were important events that changed how deeply he understood things, how much he cared about others, and how clear his purpose was. The Ethiopian Church's preservation of these texts sheds light on facets of his life that are deliberately concealed or excluded in Western tradition, offering a more comprehensive understanding of the preparation, training, and transformation of the individual who would become pivotal to Christianity during the largely undocumented years of his life. The Ethiopian texts illuminate aspects of Jesus' life and mission that are predominantly missing from Western accounts, intricately connected to the history and prophecies of Africa. People say that while he was traveling to places like Egypt and Kush, he met kings and rulers who knew how important he was because of their ancestors' knowledge and prophetic traditions. These leaders were responsible for keeping track of the histories of their dynasties, passing on cultural knowledge, and figuring out what omens and celestial patterns meant. They saw Jesus as more than just a visitor from Nazareth. They saw him as a figure whose arrival fulfilled ancient prophecies and connected God's will with human history. It was said that his presence among these leaders confirmed prophecies that had been kept secret for generations. The Ethiopian texts go into great detail about interactions with African kings, showing scenes in royal courts where Jesus was treated with respect. He would listen carefully as kings told him the stories of their dynasties while wearing clothes that showed the colors of their kingdoms. These stories were passed down from ancestors who had kept sacred knowledge hidden from outsiders. These stories weren't just about history. They also had deeper meanings and predictions about the cycles of leadership, morality, and divine favor. According to these stories, Jesus answered with insight, giving explanations that linked the past to a vision for the future. His words struck a chord with the leaders, confirming moral lessons, ethical governance, and the responsibilities of power under divine scrutiny. These texts repeatedly show prophetic meaning. The Ethiopian manuscripts indicate that Jesus was perceived as the realization of long-standing prophecies regarding a figure destined to provide spiritual enlightenment, justice, and direction. Kings and priests in Africa saw signs of his coming in the stars, rivers, and the line of rulers. The texts show that these prophecies were not just about politics or history, they were also about moral courage, personal responsibility, and how to live in line with God's will. Jesus' conversations with these kings were both a fulfillment of prophecy and a lesson, as he shared wisdom that connected God's will with real-world leadership. The Ethiopian texts also stress the spiritual lessons that can be learned from these African prophecies. Jesus is depicted as assimilating knowledge regarding governance, justice, and social harmony, understanding the interplay between human decisions and divine intent. For example, in Kush, he saw rituals meant to honor ancestors and keep the kingdom in balance. These practices were full of symbols and moral lessons that showed how morality, leadership, and spiritual alignment are all connected. These experiences helped him learn more about how people act, what it means to be morally responsible, and how being spiritually aware can change societies. The texts say that these lessons would later shape the way he taught, focusing on kindness, responsibility, and good judgment. The texts also talk about dynasties and spiritual insights, as well as specific prophecies that connected Jesus to Africa. One story is about a Kushite king who, guided by visions from his ancestors, saw signs in the natural world. patterns in the river's flow, movements of the stars, and omens in dreams that foretold the arrival of a teacher whose wisdom would cross borders. There were ceremonies and symbolic gestures to show how important the meeting was and how Jesus was a prophet. The texts imply that these encounters were integral to a larger divine plan, with Africa being central to comprehending the extent of his mission. Jesus was not just a passive participant in these prophetic traditions. The Ethiopian texts show him asking questions, thinking deeply, and giving answers that showed both humility and understanding. He thought of prophecy as a living thing that needed to be understood in context and used wisely. These interactions also show that knowledge flows both ways. While he was learning through mystical teachings and spiritual experiences, he also confirmed the wisdom of African traditions and added them to a bigger picture of how people relate to the divine. The combination of prophecy, culture, and spiritual teaching shows how well he was prepared for a ministry that would soon go far beyond the limits of his youth. The Ethiopian manuscripts indicate that these prophetic links held both moral and spiritual significance. African kings' recognition of Jesus was not meant to boost his political status, but to stress the moral and divine duties that come with leadership and human action. Lessons from prophecy stressed the importance of justice, humility, service, and protecting knowledge for the good of future generations. In these narratives, prophecy is inherently linked to moral instruction, imparting that foresight and comprehension entail the obligation to act judiciously, empathetically, and in accordance with divine intent. These interactions also made him more aware of how different cultures are and how spiritual truth is universal. He learned how spiritual principles showed up in different situations, how moral guidance could be kept alive across cultures, and how divine intention could be shown through human history by talking to African kings and dynasties. The Ethiopian texts show that this experience made him a teacher who could connect people from different cultures and religions. He could teach lessons that were both useful to everyone and respectful of the local culture. These texts are full of symbols and vivid images of prophetic experiences. As the king tells stories about his ancestors, Jesus stands at the point where the Nile and a holy tributary meet, watching the sun rise over distant mountains. In another, he walks through palace halls that are decorated with murals showing the successes and failures of past rulers. He thinks about how human actions and divine oversight are both cyclical. These kinds of pictures show how prophecy, history, and moral instruction can all work together, so that every encounter is a lesson in how to observe, understand, and act ethically. The Ethiopian texts provide a compelling depiction of Jesus' interaction with African prophecies through these narratives. They portray him not merely as a visitor or student, but as a figure whose presence validated enduring visions, whose insights clarified moral and spiritual truths, and whose actions embodied a fusion of divine guidance and human accountability. These years spent with African kings and sages show a side of his life that emphasizes preparation, reflection, and the development of wisdom that would later define his ministry. They show a young man who was very aware of both earthly and spiritual realities. The Ethiopian texts portray Jesus as a profoundly human figure, contending with emotions that mirror the intricacies of his journey, even amidst significant learning and mystical experiences. He was not free from doubt or uncertainty, nor was he immune to the frustration that comes from feeling like knowledge and understanding are just out of reach. When he was in Egypt and Kush, there were times when he felt like he couldn't handle what he was learning and the weight of his mission was too much for him to bear. He fought with questions about his purpose, what people who knew he was important expected of him, and the size of the divine plan that was happening all around him while he was alone in huge deserts or by the Nile. The texts talk about nights when Jesus would sit outside under the stars and think about the mysteries of life while the cool desert air brushed against his face. Sometimes the visions he saw, the lessons he learned from wise people, and the whispers of angels made things more confusing than they were clear. He wondered why he had been chosen, why he had learned so much at such a young age, and if he had the strength to live up to the expectations that others already had for him. These moments of reflection show a side of Jesus that isn't often talked about in Western stories. A young man dealing with the conflict between great responsibility and normal human weakness. He was frustrated not only by his own problems, but also by the problems he faced in his environment and with the people he met. Some teachers tested him over and over again with lessons that were hard to understand and required him to be patient, think, and keep going. He often had to deal with moral and spiritual problems that required more wisdom than he had at the time, when it wasn't clear what the right thing to do was. He sometimes felt the sting of being alone because he was different in a world where fitting in was safe and comfortable. Even though kings and wise men recognized him, being set apart made him very lonely. This loneliness made him work on his inner strength and faith in divine guidance. The Ethiopian texts also talk about times when there is spiritual tension. It wasn't just academic to learn about angelic knowledge, prophecy, and secret wisdom. It took a lot of focus and discernment, which could be tiring. There were times when Jesus had a hard time making sense of what he saw in the world around him with what he taught. He witnessed suffering, injustice, and moral deficiencies, prompting him to contemplate the applicability of his acquired wisdom to a world replete with imperfections. These problems didn't go away. They stayed with him, shaping his emotional and spiritual growth and giving him the inner strength that would later define his ministry. Faith was his anchor even when he was unsure and angry. The Ethiopian texts show times when Jesus would stop, take a breath, and get back in touch with the divine presence he felt in the world around him. The Nile's flowing waters, the desert's endless horizon, and the rhythmic chants of temple rituals all made him think of a bigger order at work. Faith helped him get through the unknown and gave him the strength to face the difficulties of learning, traveling, and getting ready. He would use this connection even when he was feeling hopeless, finding clarity in meditation, insight in contemplation, and courage in reflection. Conflict was not confined to his internal realm. It permeated his interactions with others. In Egypt and Kush, he met teachers and leaders who made him rethink what he thought he knew, made him question his understanding, and made him explain why he thought what he did. These fights were hard, and sometimes they were frustrating, but in the end they helped me grow. They put his patience to the test, helped him become more discerning, and taught him how important it is to be humble and open. Every argument, debate, or disagreement helped him understand more, showing him that knowledge without thought and moral grounding was not enough. Traveling itself was another challenge. Traveling to other countries where you don't know the language, customs, or expectations required you to be flexible and strong. The Ethiopian texts showed Jesus watching, listening, and learning in places that could be hard on his body and mind. He had to deal with desert storms, extreme heat, and long trips that tested his endurance. He also had to be polite to kings, priests, and scholars, which required both tact and confidence. These experiences helped him develop discipline in both his mind and body, which would help him meet the demands of a ministry that would require both spiritual authority and practical wisdom. These years were emotionally complicated because of the conflict between youthful curiosity and the burden of destiny. Jesus was still growing and learning how to balance his own wants and needs with the duties that came with being called by God. He wanted to spend time with others and laugh with them, but the road ahead of him required him to be alone, think, and stay focused. The Ethiopian texts show him trying to meet these human needs while also meeting the very high standards that were set for him. This struggle made his later teachings about compassion, patience, and resilience very real. There were often times of doubt and conflict that led to moments of revelation and insight. The Ethiopian manuscripts tell stories of times when Jesus, after long periods of questioning or frustration, would have a moment of great clarity, a vision, a symbolic dream, or a sudden understanding that connected his experiences to a bigger purpose. These breakthroughs were not just intellectual accomplishments. They were also emotional and spiritual awakenings that made his faith stronger and his resolve stronger. They show how important struggle and perseverance were to his preparation, making him a young man who could feel for others, see things clearly, and have moral courage. These challenges showed Jesus' human side in full. The Ethiopian texts depict him as a person who experienced fear, confusion, and longing, who questioned, hesitated, and sought comfort, and who ultimately became stronger, wiser, and more compassionate through hardship. His journey was as much about dealing with his own problems as it was about learning new things. The lessons he learned from these struggles became the basis for a ministry that would change lives, challenge beliefs, and inspire generations. These years of emotional and spiritual testing built his character, gave him the ability to empathize with others, and gave him wisdom that could only come from living through hard times. These experiences would shape his later life in ways that would bridge the ordinary and the extraordinary. While traveling through Egypt and Kush, Jesus had an experience that would change how he saw his mission forever. The Ethiopian texts say it was both awe-inspiring and terrifying in its size. It happened in a secluded sanctuary deep in the mountains, a place that only people who had spent years studying and awakening spiritually could get to. The texts say that the sanctuary was a place where earthly and heavenly energies came together, where the line between the human and the divine felt thin, and where knowledge that was hidden from most people could be revealed. The manuscripts say that Jesus had a revelation of hidden knowledge here. This was the end of 18 years of lessons, visions, and mystical encounters that had been building up. The event started with a trip to the sanctuary, led by a wise person who had seen him grow and thought he was ready. The path itself was hard, with narrow cliffs, thick forests, and rough rivers, which were like the spiritual and emotional challenges he had faced. With every step, he felt like he was being tested, forcing him to face his doubts and fears. The Ethiopian texts say that Jesus went on the journey with a mix of excitement and humility, knowing that what lay ahead would test everything he thought he knew about himself, his purpose, and the divine plan. When he got to the sanctuary, he was met with a silence that was almost too much to handle, a silence that felt heavier than any word spoken. The wise man told him to meditate, open his heart and mind, and get ready to hear truths that would be both enlightening and hard to hear. For hours, Jesus sat and thought about everything he had learned from kings, priests, and angels. He remembered visions, parables, and lessons that had changed how he thought. The texts talk about how the environment seemed to be alive, shadows moving like living symbols on the walls, light bending in ways that looked like stars in the sky, and whispers that gave advice and warnings. Then the truth came out. In a series of visions and meetings, Jesus learned about how everything in creation is connected, how God's plans work, and how people's actions affect things across time and space. He understood truths about the order of angels, the flow of cosmic energy, and the cycles of history that connect the past, present, and future. One vision showed how kingdoms rose and fell, not just as changes in politics, but also as signs of how well people were living in line with God's will. Another showed the hidden forces of healing, prophecy, and wisdom that could help people find balance and understanding. These were ideas that wise people had kept safe and kept from spreading too far. The Ethiopian texts stress that this revelation was not just an intellectual one, but one that changed people deeply and emotionally. Jesus felt a strong connection to both God and people. He was very aware of the duties he would have and the problems he would have to deal with. The visions showed him how much people suffer, how moral choices can have bad effects, and how spiritual insight can be used to help, heal, and inspire. The manuscripts show that he felt both awe and fear, excitement and humility, knowing that the knowledge he was getting was powerful but fragile and should be used with care and compassion. The Ethiopian texts give very detailed accounts of the transformative event, which also included encounters with celestial beings. Angels were not distant figures. They were mentors, guides, and reflections of divine truth that helped people understand the spiritual forces that shape the world. Some people taught lessons through conversation, which made Jesus have to figure out what they meant and how to apply them to his own life. Others showed up in symbolic ways, which meant he had to use his gut feelings and moral reasoning to figure out what they meant. These interactions were very intense and often pushed him to the edge of what he could understand. They required faith, patience, and bravery. Every meeting made him more determined and helped him see his life's purpose in a new way. The texts also talk about how this revelation affects history. The knowledge that Jesus gained was depicted as a model for spiritual leadership, a guide for moral governance, and a structure for comprehending the divine purpose in human history. It taught us about the moral duties of leaders, the value of justice, and the need to pass on knowledge to future generations. The Ethiopian Church kept a version of history that shows Africa as an important place in the life of one of history's most important people. This goes against what Western traditions say about how simple his youth was. The texts say that without this time of change, the depth, wisdom, and authority that would define his ministry might not have been fully realized. The drama of the revelation is made even stronger by the tests Jesus went through during the event. The Ethiopian texts say that visions and teachings often came at the same time, which made people mentally and spiritually stressed. He faced problems that made him think about how moral knowledge is and how responsible action is. With each insight came a problem: how to combine wisdom with humility, how to use power without being arrogant, and how to balance God's will with human free will. These tensions show how hard he worked to get ready, which shaped not only his mind but also his moral compass and emotional strength. In the sanctuary, Jesus also received deep healing and renewal, both physically and spiritually. The texts say that he got his energy back, his focus got sharper, and his inner self got more in tune with itself after a long time of meditation, reflection, and angelic guidance. He left the sanctuary with a clearer mind, a stronger sense of purpose, and a greater readiness to use the hidden knowledge he had gained in the ministry that was waiting for him. This change was the end of the 18 years that had been missing. During that time, they had learned, struggled, and grown, and now they were finally able to understand and feel powerful. The Ethiopian texts depict Jesus as a figure who reconciled human experience with divine wisdom during this transformative event. The revelations he received were not vague ideas. They were practical, moral, and spiritual tools that helped him decide what to do, how to act, and what to teach. The manuscripts suggest that these truths should only be shared with certain people so that they can enlighten people without overwhelming them and keep power in check with compassion. They paint a picture of a young man who has gone through a lot of hard times, learned a lot, and is now ready to take on a role that will change history. This climactic time also showed how his time in Africa was connected to his later ministry. Every lesson, vision, and experience helped him grow in understanding, empathy, and moral judgment. The Ethiopian texts say that the secret knowledge he learned was the basis for his way of teaching, healing, and leading communities. This way of doing things focused on understanding, moral responsibility, and following God's plan. By keeping these stories, the texts give us a glimpse into an important time in his life, shedding light on the 18 years that have been a mystery in Western traditions for a long time. The Ethiopian texts show that the lessons and knowledge Jesus gained during the 18 years that are missing were not just random events. They were the building blocks of the ministry that would later change and inspire many lives. Every time he met a sage, a king, or a celestial being, every time he learned something new, and every time he fought with doubt and faith, he became a man who was uniquely qualified to teach, heal, and inspire. During these formative years, he was spiritually incubating, learning lessons not as abstract ideas but as real-life experiences. This gave his later words authenticity and depth. The texts depict him as an individual who traversed the African continent, witnessing human vulnerability and magnificence, and intimately engaging with divine wisdom, ultimately acquiring a profound comprehension of the equilibrium between terrestrial endeavors and spiritual obligations. One of the most obvious ways that these hidden teachings have affected him is in how he thinks about faith. The Ethiopian manuscripts indicate that Jesus possessed a sophisticated understanding of belief as both individual and collective, a dynamic that necessitated cultivation through practice, contemplation, and discernment. He had seen how people in Kush and Egypt kept their spiritual balance through rituals, good government, and following the wisdom of their ancestors. This influenced his later focus on faith as an active participation in life rather than a passive recognition of the divine. He knew that faith could be tested by hard times, that doubt could live alongside trust, and that to grow spiritually, one needed to be patient, humble, and think about things. These years also had a lot of wisdom in them. Jesus' interactions with African kings and mystical teachings developed his ability to perceive the underlying significance of events, discern behavioral patterns, and interpret actions within broader ethical and spiritual contexts. The Ethiopian texts talk about times when he showed good judgment by giving advice that brought together different points of view, revealed hidden truths, and gave practical solutions that were based on moral integrity. This wisdom was not abstract. It was inextricably linked to his lived experience of adversity, education, and contemplation. Later in his ministry, whether he was counseling disciples, interacting with the marginalized, or challenging societal norms, it became clear that his words had the weight of understanding that came from years of watching and thinking about things. The divine plan, as elucidated through these concealed teachings, was integral to his preparation. The Ethiopian manuscripts stress that Jesus came to understand not only his own part but also the larger picture of history and the fate of humanity. His conversations with wise people and prophetic visions taught him how human choices and divine guidance have affected people over time, and how moral courage and ethical behavior can change the course of communities. This understanding influenced the stories, parables, and lessons he taught in his later ministry. He taught not only through miracles and lessons, but also by living a life that was in line with a higher purpose. This showed that understanding the divine plan takes time, thought, and dedication. His teaching methods show how the hidden knowledge affects him even more. The Ethiopian texts show a man who knew how to use stories, parables, and symbolic gestures to convey complicated truths. These methods made wisdom easier to understand without losing its depth. He learned in Africa how stories can inspire moral reflection and how important it is to connect spiritual principles to real life. He could help people and groups gain insight without forcing them to follow a certain set of beliefs. He did this by getting people involved, talking to them, and showing them how to live. This method, which was heavily influenced by what he learned as a child, became a hallmark of his ministry and helped him reach people from all walks of life. The texts also imply that his understanding of compassion and human connection improved during this time. Seeing the problems, unfairness, and strength of people in different African countries helped Jesus understand how to feel for others while still keeping his goals clear. He saw how hard it is to find the right balance between mercy and accountability, freedom and responsibility, and how important it is to meet both the spiritual and practical needs of people. These insights influenced his subsequent interactions, rendering his teachings relatable, transformative, and profoundly humane. His focus on love, forgiveness, and service can be seen as a natural continuation of what he learned during the years of hidden learning. The Ethiopian manuscripts also show how hidden knowledge and his moral authority are connected. Jesus cultivated a presence that elicited respect and trust through the amalgamation of divine insight, human observation, and ethical reasoning devoid of coercion. This moral authority came from experience and thought, not from formal power. This shows that real leadership comes from understanding, humility, and following higher principles. The texts show him as someone who could understand both spiritual and earthly realities deeply and use that knowledge to help others. He was able to inspire, challenge, and lead without pushing away the people he was trying to reach because he had worked hard on these skills for years. The Ethiopian texts also say that Jesus' time of preparation gave him a vision for unity and integration. He saw many different cultures, languages, and spiritual practices and saw that they all had something in common when it came to human desire, morality, and connection to the divine. This understanding guided his inclusive approach, stressing that spiritual truth goes beyond borders while still honoring cultural and contextual differences. It is a lesson that he learned in his later ministry, how to bring people together, respect differences, and share a universal message without losing the depth of each person's experience. In the end, the hidden teachings connected his personal growth with his public mission. The Ethiopian manuscripts make it clear that every lesson, trial, and revelation he had during the 18 years he was missing helped him become clearer, more authoritative, and deeper in his thinking. Faith, wisdom, compassion, and comprehension of divine purpose were not spontaneously developed but meticulously nurtured through years of observation, contemplation, and interaction with both human and spiritual knowledge. These early experiences made sure that his later ministry was based on real-life understanding, moral integrity, and spiritual discernment. The Ethiopian texts encourage us to think about how important it is to be prepared, learn, and be spiritually aware. They say that to become wiser and more moral, you need both challenges and guidance, struggle and reflection, solitude and engagement. The story of Jesus' hidden years is not just an interesting historical fact. It is also a powerful example of how knowledge, faith, and experience come together to create transformative leadership. It shows that the mysteries in the Ethiopian Bible are more than just different stories. They give us a way to understand the depth, preparation, and purpose of one of history's most important people. The Ethiopian texts that tell the story of Jesus' 18 missing years teach us lessons that go far beyond history and speak directly to our lives today. These years were not wasted. They were full of deep learning, struggle, and growth. They show that preparation, patience, and spiritual focus are all important parts of personal growth. People can learn how to deal with their own problems by watching how a young Jesus dealt with his doubts, searched for wisdom, and kept going through physical and emotional challenges. The texts make you think about how knowledge, faith, and resilience are connected. They show that building character often happens in quiet, private moments rather than in public praise or quick rewards. Life today moves quickly and is full of distractions, which makes it hard to find time for reflection and spiritual growth. The years that Jesus was missing remind us that times of silence, solitude, and focused learning are important for real growth. As he journeyed through deserts, cities, and enchanted landscapes to enhance his comprehension, viewers are encouraged to contemplate how they might pursue environments and instances that facilitate reflection, personal revelation, and development. These lessons are not limited to spiritual practice. They encompass moral and intellectual development, indicating that patience, discipline, and curiosity are essential for attaining wisdom and ethical living. The Ethiopian texts also stress how important it is to find a balance between struggle and reflection. Jesus had to deal with problems, anger, and times of doubt, but these were all important parts of his training. In the same way, people can see that problems in their own lives, whether they are emotional, professional, or relational, can help them grow if they are dealt with purpose. The years that are missing show that going through hard times with patience, reflection, and a willingness to learn from others can turn hardship into understanding. This point of view changes the way we see problems. Instead of seeing them as failures, we see them as important steps in developing character, empathy, and understanding. Another lesson is how important it is to get information from different places. Jesus learned from kings, wise people, angels, and holy books. He put together different points of view to form a clear picture of life, morality, and God's plan. For viewers today, this means that it's important to look for knowledge in many places, value different experiences, and be open to ideas that make you think or change how you see the world. Being around people from different cultures, philosophies, and spiritual traditions can help you understand them better and make you more compassionate, just like Jesus did when he was growing up. Another thing that viewers can learn from these missing years is how to think about ethics. The Ethiopian texts show that Jesus often had to deal with moral problems, whether he was trying to figure out hidden knowledge or deal with people. He had to figure out what was right and wrong, find a balance between justice and mercy, and think about how his actions would affect people and communities. These lessons are very important today because they remind us that making moral choices requires careful thought, empathy, and bravery. The story of his hidden years makes people think about how their choices fit with their own values, the well-being of others, and a bigger sense of purpose. These texts also show that faith is a guiding principle for modern relevance. Even when things were hard and he wasn't sure what to do, the young Jesus kept trusting in God's guidance. This shows that faith isn't about not having doubts. It's about always acting in line with higher principles. For viewers, this shows how belief can be put into action. Faith means being patient, brave, and persistent when you don't know what's going to happen. Building this kind of trust can help people grow, improve their relationships, and find their way in their careers. It can also help them deal with problems with strength and hope. The cultural aspect of these lost years teaches us even more. The Ethiopian manuscripts about Jesus' time in Africa show how important it is to learn from other cultures, understand their customs, and value the variety of human experience. People who watch this can take it as a call to be more open to the world, to respect cultural differences, and to see the value in different ways of doing things and learning. This method helps people understand each other better, see things from different points of view, and feel more connected to the world around them, which is still very important in today's multicultural society. These texts may be most important because they encourage readers to actively seek out knowledge instead of just taking it in. Jesus' journey shows that you have to work hard, get involved, and keep going to gain wisdom. The hidden years weren't just about learning new things, they were also about making lessons your own, questioning what you thought you knew, and making what you learned a part of who you are and what you do. For viewers today, this shows how important it is to be curious, explore, and make a personal commitment to learning, whether that means reading, meditating, having a mentor, or living through experiences. Knowledge is only transformative when it is applied, contemplated, and utilized to direct actions in life. In a practical way, the Ethiopian manuscripts also encourage people to see personal growth as a process that never ends. The story of Jesus shows that preparation, insight, and transformation are always happening and changing as we learn and think about them. This lesson tells people to keep working on improving themselves, becoming more ethical, and becoming more spiritually aware throughout their lives. It reminds them that even when things seem to be going slowly, uncertainly, or quietly, they can still be very important, helping them develop the skills they need to deal with problems and make a difference in the world. These years that are missing show that each person's journey is special and sacred. Jesus' journey included travel, guidance, mystical experiences, and deep thought. This reminds viewers that their own experiences, whether they are ordinary or extraordinary, shape their understanding, character, and potential. The Ethiopian texts urge people to embrace this journey with purpose, curiosity, and thoughtfulness, developing wisdom, compassion, and insight that can be used in both their own lives and the lives of others. In a nutshell, the story of these 18 years gives people a way to look at their own lives. It reminds them that small moments, quiet learning, and constant exploration can lead to big changes and a stronger sense of purpose. In monasteries on cliffs and in remote valleys in the rugged highlands of Ethiopia, there is a collection of manuscripts and oral traditions that tell an amazing story about Jesus' early years. The Ethiopian texts, written in the ancient Guizi language, are different from any other biblical manuscripts. They have 88 books, and many of them are not in the Western canon. A few of these texts tell stories about the young Jesus' travels through Africa, including his meetings with wise men, kings, and heavenly guides. They also give context for the 18 years that the New Testament doesn't talk about very much. The fact that these manuscripts have been kept safe for hundreds of years, often in conditions that required strength and creativity, is a cultural and archaeological proof that these events really happened. For a long time, Ethiopian monasteries have been the keepers of these texts, keeping libraries full of scrolls, illuminated manuscripts, and codices that tell stories of faith, miracles, and wisdom. Many of these monasteries, like the ones in Aksum and Debre Damo, are built in places that cut them off from the outside world. This makes it easier to take care of these delicate documents. For generations, monks have carefully copied, annotated, and preserved the manuscripts in these holy places. This made sure that the hidden stories of Jesus' youth were still available to people who were trained in the Guizi tradition. The manuscripts themselves are full of details about his travels, interactions with African leaders, and mystical experiences. They paint a vivid picture of life and learning during this important time. Indirect archaeological evidence backs up the idea that these journeys could have happened. Excavations near places where ancient Kushite and Egyptian civilizations lived show a network of trade routes, places to learn, and religious centers that a student or seeker of knowledge could have used. Temples, shrines, and schools were places where people could learn about spirituality and philosophy. They often welcomed students who wanted to learn more than what they could in their own countries. The Ethiopian texts imply that Jesus' travels were not random but rather intentional journeys aimed at gaining understanding, And the presence of these networks highlights the historical plausibility of such movements. Local customs give the manuscripts a cultural boost. For hundreds of years, people in Ethiopia have told oral histories that connect Jesus to the area. They say he was not just a visitor, but also someone who got to know the people well and learned from their customs, spiritual practices, and moral teachings. These stories often mix myth, legend, and history, but they always point to a young man who was both amazing and easy to talk to. People who met him were always impressed by him. Storytellers say that he took part in community rituals, meditated in natural places of worship, and showed insights that amazed both elders and scholars. These stories have been passed down through generations, which suggests that they were based on real events, even if they were made more interesting with symbolic or mystical elements. The manuscripts are full of descriptions of sacred places, artifacts, and symbols that make the story feel more real. Descriptions of altars, meditation rooms, and ritual spaces match up with what archaeologists have found in ancient Ethiopian and Nubian sites. This gives the stories a sense of being real. Some symbols that show up over and over in the texts, like angels, celestial patterns, and geometric shapes, are similar to decorations found in Ethiopian churches and monasteries. This suggests that the stories were connected to local culture and religious practice. These connections between art and architecture make the texts more believable by showing that there is a living tradition that combines storytelling, devotion, and historical observation. Inscriptions and local records from places like Aksum and Meroe, in addition to monasteries and manuscripts, suggest that people, students, and scholars traveled across borders in ancient times. The Ethiopian texts say that Jesus learned from older people who were experts in astronomy, ethics, healing, and prophecy, which were all important subjects at these historical centers. The coming together of spiritual, intellectual, and cultural knowledge in these areas makes it likely that a young traveler, especially one with a divine purpose, could have really gotten into these places of learning. These stories are amazing, but they are based on a cultural and historical context that makes them believable instead of made up. The manuscript's storytelling parts make the evidence even stronger. They tell stories about Jesus as a young man meditating by the Nile, watching the stars and rivers, talking to kings and priests about morality, justice, and the duties of leadership, and learning how to use knowledge of healing, prophecy, and spiritual insight. These stories are full of details, feelings, and immersion, showing events as real-life experiences instead of abstract lessons. When you look at them this way, the manuscripts are not just documents. They are also windows into the daily life, struggles, and successes of a young man shaped by Africa's rich spiritual and cultural landscape. Also, the fact that these manuscripts always have angelic and mystical guidance is important. Western texts seldom ascribe direct mentorship to celestial entities during Jesus' youth, whereas Ethiopian manuscripts depict these interactions as essential to his education. Angels are depicted as imparting wisdom, elucidating visions, and directing moral choices, thereby integrating spiritual truth with human experience. From an archaeological standpoint, ritual spaces associated with such visions have been discovered in Ethiopian monastic sites, reinforcing the idea that these practices were historically rooted, culturally ingrained, and regarded with seriousness by local communities. The manuscripts, monasteries, oral traditions, and archaeological context collectively construct a persuasive argument for the feasibility of Jesus' undocumented years in Africa. They show a young man moving through physical, cultural, and spiritual landscapes, learning from a wide range of teachers, and taking in ideas that would later shape his ministry. These stories, which have been kept in very good condition, give modern viewers not only a historical interest but also a way to see how deep, prepared, and formative experiences shaped one of history's most important people. The Ethiopian texts turn what could have been an unexplained gap into a rich, believable story of growth, learning, and preparation through storytelling, visual detail, and cultural context. As we look into the hidden years of Jesus, a question comes to mind. What would it mean for you to see someone go through such a journey of growth, learning, and spiritual discovery? Picture yourself walking with a young Jesus through the deserts of Egypt, the temples of Kush, and the monasteries of Ethiopia, watching him go through the hard times, the good times, and the revelations that made him who he is. How would these experiences change the way you think about faith, wisdom, and purpose? By thinking about these questions, viewers are encouraged to think about their own lives, including times of difficulty, times of learning, and times of insight that they may have missed or not given enough credit to. Your personal thoughts on these events are important because they help you connect the ancient story to your own life, which helps you feel like there is a link between historical events and modern spiritual exploration. We want people to actively share these thoughts in the comments, along with where they are and what's going on around them. You can join a global conversation by commenting with your name and city. This will connect you with other people who are thinking about the same things and trying to figure them out. These talks can help us understand how the lessons from Jesus' early life apply to people from different cultures, societies, and personal experiences. When you share your thoughts, you help everyone understand better, which makes the meaning richer and encourages conversation. It reminds us that learning and thinking are never truly solitary. The Ethiopian texts offer various levels of understanding, from mystical knowledge and secret teachings to practical advice on how to live a good and moral life. People who watch can think about which parts of these hidden years resonate with their own lives the most. Maybe it's the focus on staying strong in the face of uncertainty, the balance of faith and action, or the mixing of different types of wisdom that speaks to me the most. The video encourages viewers to think about these things and find lessons that they can use in their own lives, whether it's in their spiritual practice, making decisions every day, or getting involved in larger communities. You can ask yourself, which of these lessons can I use in my own life? Encourages active participation with the material instead of just passively taking it in. In addition to thinking about these themes on your own, you can learn more about them by reading related material. This video is part of a series that looks at the Ethiopian Bible, the Book of Enoch, and other hidden texts that reveal things about Jesus' life that Western traditions often miss. People who watch these videos are encouraged to keep watching so that the story can grow in depth and detail. Each video builds on the last, connecting historical research, spiritual insight, and cultural context in a way that provides a comprehensive understanding of the hidden years. Following this journey makes sure that the story isn't limited to one point of view, but instead grows into a rich, interconnected tapestry of knowledge and discovery. As you read the material, think about the moral and spiritual issues it brings up. How does knowing about the years of Jesus that aren't written down change the way you think about leadership, morality, and God's plan? What can we learn from the right mix of being alone and getting help, working hard and learning new things, and doing things and thinking about them? By talking about these questions in the comments, viewers make a place for group inquiry, where different points of view help us understand the story and its relevance today. This interactive method lets the story live on after the video ends, encouraging conversation that connects old texts with new experiences. The Ethiopian manuscripts also show how important it is for people to work together to pass on knowledge. Jesus learned from mentors, peers, and even communities along the way. His experiences were often about relationships. This makes people think about how their own communities can help them grow as people. Who are the people in your life right now who are helping you learn and make moral decisions? Sharing these thoughts with the public can encourage others to think about the people and things that have shaped them and realize how important it is to learn in a social context. By talking about this, viewers are taking part in the kind of relational wisdom that the Ethiopian texts say was important to Jesus when he was growing up. We also want people to think about how powerful curiosity and exploration can be. Jesus was willing to travel to new places, learn from different people, and be open to new ideas. How can people who watch the show develop the same kind of curiosity in their own lives? It might mean reading less well-known books, learning about other cultures, or working on yourself through disciplined reflection. Commenting on these strategies and sharing your own experiences of curiosity in your daily life can help the whole community by showing that learning is a lifelong process that goes beyond the classroom or the written page. People are also invited to think about the moral and spiritual lessons that can be found in the Ethiopian texts. The stories of perseverance, compassion, discernment, and moral action are not just ideas. They are useful tools for getting through tough times. Talking about how these lessons might change the way you interact with others, make decisions, or see modern problems builds a bridge between old wisdom and how it can be used today. By interacting with the video in this way, viewers are taking part in the story of Jesus' hidden years as it unfolds, turning historical knowledge into something that is relevant today. Finally, as you read these thoughts and join in on the conversations, think about helping the channel's goal of making these hidden texts and teachings known to more people. More in-depth studies of the Ethiopian Bible, the Book of Enoch, and other historical sources are possible thanks to subscribers, likes, shares, and super thanks donations. Viewers can help spread the word about these hidden teachings by sharing this video with friends, family, or groups that are interested in spiritual, historical, and cultural insights. Every comment, thought, and interaction adds to the group's journey of discovery, making each viewer an important part of finding out what happened during the 18 missing years. When you think about the hidden years of Jesus as shown in the Ethiopian Bible, you can't help but be impressed by how deep and rich these texts are. For centuries, Western traditions have largely ignored the years between the ages of 12 and 30, which is a silent gap in the story of one of history's most important people. The Ethiopian manuscripts, on the other hand, give us detailed accounts of his travels, education, spiritual experiences, and moral development. They help us understand who Jesus was not just as a prophet or teacher, but also as a young man who was curious, faithful, and brave as he navigated a complicated world. These revelations compel us to reevaluate traditional viewpoints and to recognize the significance of preserved knowledge that has endured in remote regions, protected by communities profoundly dedicated to faith, scholarship, and spiritual inquiry. These texts are very important. The Ethiopian Bible, which is written in Guizi and has 88 books, contains mystical teachings, prophecies, and detailed accounts of Jesus' early years in Africa that are not found in the Western canon. These manuscripts do more than fill in the gaps in history. They let us see his personal struggles, victories, and lessons learned. From moments of meditation by rivers to conversations with kings and sages, the young Jesus is made more human, and his journey becomes a mirror that shows the struggles, doubts, and growth that anyone who wants to learn and believe may go through. By looking at these stories, viewers get a view that is historical, spiritual, and very personal, which makes them think about their own paths, choices, and possibilities. The Ethiopian texts show a world where learning was complete and included spiritual insight, moral judgment, and practical knowledge. Jesus' conversations with African leaders, mystical teachers, and angelic guides show how important it is to be humble, seek guidance, and have mentors when trying to learn. People today can learn from this integrative approach because it shows that personal growth and wisdom come from experience, reflection, and being open to different points of view. These teachings promote a balanced approach to moral dilemmas, ethical decisions, and moments of uncertainty, integrating action with contemplation, intellect with emotion, and curiosity with self-discipline. These hidden years also show how universal Jesus' mission is. His travels through Egypt and Kush, where he learned about the people, their religions, and their customs, show that he had an open mind about knowledge and God's plan. Viewers are encouraged to recognize that truth and wisdom are not limited to a singular location, tradition, or culture, but are frequently uncovered through experiences with diversity and disparity. The manuscripts make you appreciate learning from people from other cultures, the value of community, and the need to stay open to new ideas from unexpected places. This lesson is very important in a world that is often divided by borders and ideas. It reminds us that understanding and compassion come from being involved in the lives of other people. The moral and spiritual growth of Jesus is a major theme in all of these texts. He dealt with doubt, hardship, and tough moral choices, but he did so with thoughtfulness, clarity, and bravery. These stories encourage people to think about their own moral choices, the effects of their actions, and how learning and thinking can help them make better choices. The hidden years show that preparation, character building, and spiritual growth often happen when no one is watching, during times of difficulty, reflection, and quiet learning. This is a strong reminder for viewers that growth doesn't happen right away or in a way that can be seen, but it does change things for the better. The story also emphasizes how important it is to be curious and actively involved in the world. Jesus' willingness to travel, ask questions, and look for mentors shows that he was willing to learn in a way that was planned, immersive, and brave. For people today, these lessons mean that it's important to look for knowledge outside of what you already know, be open to new ideas, and face the unknown with confidence and humility. The Ethiopian manuscripts are both a record of history and a useful guide. They make us think about how we seek knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual growth in our own lives. As you read these stories, keep in mind that your involvement is important for this exploration to continue. Your thoughts, comments, and interactions make these hidden texts come to life. Please leave a comment with your name and city so that other people who are trying to solve these mysteries can connect with you. You can help spread the word about the Ethiopian Bible and its hidden wisdom by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends, family, and communities. We can go even deeper into these old texts and present them in ways that are easy to understand, interesting, and informative now that we have reached 10,000 subscribers. If you want to help this work even more, super thanks donations let us keep looking at rare manuscripts, translating and interpreting hidden passages, and sharing what we learn with people all over the world. Every act of support, whether it's subscribing, sharing, commenting, or giving money, makes the channel better at finding and preserving spiritual, historical, and cultural knowledge. It makes sure that people all over the world can still see the mysteries of the 18 missing years, the teachings in the Ethiopian Bible, and other holy books like the Book of Enoch. Lastly, if you want to read the primary sources yourself, you can get the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English by clicking the link in the description. This lets viewers interact with the texts directly, which helps them understand them better and connect more personally with the stories that have been preserved through centuries of careful study and devotion. As you think about these hidden years, think about how being curious, asking moral questions, and being open to spiritual experiences can affect your own life. Also, think about how the ancient wisdom of the Ethiopian manuscripts can help you live a more meaningful and transformative life today. By reading the Ethiopian texts, thinking about what they teach, and joining in the ongoing conversation, people are helping to find out the whole story of Jesus' early years. You are not just a bystander. You are a witness, a contributor, and a participant in a journey that connects history, culture, and personal insight. The hidden years, which were once lost or forgotten, are now an invitation to learn, think, and pass on knowledge that can improve lives, communities, and understanding across generations. What did Jesus do between the ages of 12 and 30? For hundreds of years, this question has stumped scholars, theologians, and people who are just curious. The New Testament Gospels tell us a lot about his birth, the amazing things that happened in his early years, and his ministry, which started when he was about 30. But for almost 20 years of his life, there is a strange silence. This time is often called the lost years. What did Jesus do during this time? Where did he go? Who had an effect on him? And maybe the most interesting thing is what secrets might be hidden in the texts that aren't in the Western Bible. Anyone who wants to learn more about Jesus' life and the deeper spiritual and historical truths that may have been quietly kept in forgotten scriptures will find these questions interesting. This gap has sparked speculation and wonder for generations. Some historians think he lived a simple, secret life in Nazareth, learning a trade and waiting for the right time to start his ministry. Others say that he traveled, went to faraway places, and looked for knowledge that would help him carry out the amazing mission he was meant to do. The lack of detailed records in the canonical texts creates a deep mystery, a story that makes us think about what could have happened. In today's world, the interest in ancient wisdom, lost histories, and hidden knowledge is closely related to this question. People today look for secrets in old manuscripts or hidden archives all over the world. The missing years of Jesus make us wonder what he learned, how his experiences shaped his view of people, and what lessons were kept that we don't know about. This is where the Ethiopian Bible comes in. It gives us a look at a tradition that has kept details that are missing from the Western canon. Unlike the familiar 66 or 73 books of the Protestant or Catholic Bibles, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains a Bible containing 88 books, written in the ancient Gizi language, some of which include texts considered lost or excluded elsewhere. Some of these are stories and teachings that give hints about the hidden years of Jesus, describing journeys, encounters, and mystical experiences that go against what most people think. These texts say that Jesus spent his early adulthood learning, exploring his spirituality, and getting ready for what was to come. He may have even traveled to places like Egypt and Ethiopia. Even though mainstream scholars and churches may not pay much attention to these writings, they give us a fascinating look at how ancient communities thought about Jesus as a child and how he became wise. The Ethiopian scriptures imply that during these years, Jesus did not stay in his hometown or only with people he knew. Instead, he may have learned from educated people, spiritual leaders, and maybe even early mystical traditions. These lessons may have helped him with his ministry and teachings later on. The texts suggest a life of preparation, a journey of discovery and reflection, as he met people, ideas, and problems that helped him understand faith, human nature, and God's purpose. This view, which is up for debate, lets us picture Jesus not just as a boy growing up in relative obscurity, but as a seeker of knowledge who quietly gathered the experiences that would shape his later life. This mystery has a special meaning for people today. In a time when people want to learn about secret histories, hidden truths, and knowledge that goes against the mainstream, the story of the missing years is both interesting and alive. It makes us think about what has been passed down, what has been kept, and what might still be hidden in history. It is a call to be curious, to get involved, and to be amazed, not just about a person who lived more than 2,000 years ago, but also about the nature of wisdom, learning, and spiritual growth over time. As we start this journey into the secret years of Jesus, it's important to remember that this is more than just a story about history. It is a story that connects the past and the present and makes us think about questions that are still important. How can we find the truth when the records we have are not complete? What do we do with teachings that have been kept alive in one tradition but ignored in another? And how can old books, like the Ethiopian Bible, give us new ideas that make us think differently about one of history's most important people? These questions are more than just academic. They are the start of a story that is both human and transcendent, mixing history, spirituality, and imagination in ways that move the mind and the heart. Before we look at what these Ethiopian texts say, we want to take a moment to thank you, our viewers. You are an important part of this journey. We can only bring you these deep and interesting stories because of your interest, involvement, and support. We hope you can help us get to 10,000 subscribers so we can keep finding hidden knowledge and sharing it in ways that make people think and wonder. If you like these explorations, please consider sending us a super thanks to help us financially so we can go even deeper into these ancient teachings and share more of this knowledge. We also want to know your name and where you are watching from. Please leave your name and city in the comments. This helps us connect with our audience and see how far this journey has spread around the world. If you want to learn more about these teachings, don't forget that the link in the description will take you to the complete Bible with 88 books and the Book of Enoch in English. If you share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel, we can keep exploring together and build a community of people who want to learn more about the mysteries found in ancient texts. As we enter the story of Jesus' lost years, get ready to follow a path that mixes history, faith, and imagination. This journey won't just tell stories you already know. It will show you a side of Jesus' life that hasn't been seen in hundreds of years, giving you new ideas and insights that will make you think, inspire, and challenge you. The years that are missing aren't just a blank spot in history. They are a chance to think about what could have happened, picture the events that shaped him, and connect with a tradition that keeps stories that the rest of the world has forgotten or missed. The Ethiopian Bible will help us understand the shape of a young man's life, the decisions he made, and the wisdom he may have gained before he became a minister, which changed history forever. The New Testament only gives us brief glimpses of Jesus' early years. The Gospels tell the story of how he was born in Bethlehem, how the Magi came to see him, how he fled to Egypt to escape Herod's order, and how he briefly returned to Nazareth. A few chapters talk about his family life, including his parents Mary and Joseph. They also tell the story of when he was 12 and was found at the temple in Jerusalem talking to the elders and surprising them with how much he knew. But other than these few events, the text is quiet. There is very little record of what he did, learned, or grew for almost 20 years. There is almost no record of this long time, which lasted from the end of his childhood to the start of his public ministry at age 30. This has left a gap that has puzzled both scholars and believers. Different people have come up with different ideas about this silence. Some people think that Jesus lived a simple, unremarkable life in Nazareth, where he learned to be a carpenter from Joseph and quietly got ready for the ministry that would define the rest of his life. Some people say that this time of normalcy was important for him to understand the rhythms of work, family, and community, which would later shape his teachings on compassion, justice, and faith. However, despite these elucidations, the inquiries persist. Why is there an absence of a more comprehensive account of his thoughts, journeys, or personal development during this period? Why do the canonical Gospels, which otherwise give very detailed accounts of his birth and ministry, not look at such a large part of his life? For a long time, scholars have argued about why this was left out. Some people say that the Gospel writers' main focus was on Jesus' public ministry, miracles, death, and resurrection, and that the early years were less important to the message they wanted to send. Some people think that there may have been other records that were lost, hidden, or left out of the text that became part of the canon on purpose. Because there aren't many details, people can guess what happened And historians have found the questions about these years to be more interesting as they've looked into the cultural and historical context of first-century Judea. In this silence, every little thing matters. For instance, there has been a lot of research on what happened in the temple. At the age of 12, Jesus is said to have understood Scripture in a way that surprised religious leaders, which suggests that he was already aware of his divine purpose. But after that, he went back to Nazareth with his parents and was obedient to them. This simple statement makes the ordinary flow of life stand out and leaves everything else to the imagination. What did he do as a teenager? Did he go on trips, learn from other teachers, or stay alone? The New Testament does not provide answers, resulting in the period referred to as the silent years. There are many different ideas about these years. Some scholars think that Jesus may have traveled outside of Galilee, maybe to Egypt, where there were Jewish communities and he could have studied Scripture more deeply. Others think he might have spent time in the desert, thinking about and getting ready spiritually for the ministry that was to come. There is, however, no clear textual evidence for these ideas in the canonical Gospels. The silence itself has become a